$0.97 to $9.79 in just 1 year.
Wow.
That kind of wild ride, well, it's not your typical stock chart, is it? It tells you right away we're looking at something pretty dynamic today. Phio Pharmaceuticals, ticker PHIO.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating about that volatility, you have to ask what's driving it. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Phio, just for you.
That's right.
You sent us this really comprehensive PHIO deep stock analysis, and our goal here is to pull out the key insights, give you a clear picture of this company as things stood, let's say, April 17th, 2025. That closing price was $2.73.
Exactly. You, our listener, you want to get up to speed quickly, but, thoroughly. And that's what we're here for. We're putting on our analytical hats, looking at Phio Pharmaceuticals, that's NASDAQ, DHIO, through, well, let's call it a value investing lens. We'll examine its core business, the leadership, the financials, its market position, basically trying to figure out what might be going on. We'll guide you through the important stuff without hopefully overwhelming you.
So how do we tackle a company with this kind of potential mixed with volatility? We've broken this deep dive into two main parts. First half, we'll really try to understand the fundamentals. What's their business model? What industry are they in? Any competitive edge?
Right.
Then we'll look at the management team. Who's in charge? How are they spending the money, capital allocation, and of course the financial health. Key numbers, stability, that sort of thing.
And then second half, we shift gears a bit. We look at market perception, what's the buzz, what are analysts saying, how's news affecting the stock?
We'll also peek at who owns the company, the ownership structure, and critically, a risk assessment, SWOT analysis, plus the potential impact of those 2025 U.S. tariffs we've heard about.
Then we'll wrap it up. Brief conclusion, and maybe something to get you thinking afterwards. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's start right at the core. What is Phio Pharmaceuticals? The report makes it clear. They're a clinical stage biotech.
Clinical stage, meaning not selling products yet.
Exactly. They're working in immuno-oncology and RNA interference, RNAi therapeutics. Very exciting fields, but inherently risky. Their main technology is something called the INTASYL platform.
Okay, INTASYL, let's unpack that. That's their unique tech. It's about self-delivering RNAi. SD-RxRNA, they call it.
That's the one.
Aiming to silence specific genes in cancer to help the immune system fight back.
Precisely. But here's the crucial part you already hinted at. No revenue from product sales right now. Zero.
Wow. So how do they keep the lights on?
Purely equity financing. They issue stock, they issue warrants, those options to buy stock later. They do registered direct offerings, private placements. That's it.
So everything hinges on clinical trials. Success there could mean licensing deals, maybe eventually selling their own drugs.
That's the entire game plan. And it's worth noting, this focus on immuno-oncology, it's relatively new for them, since about 2017, 2018.
Oh, really? What were they doing before?
They had interest in dermatology, ophthalmology. Actually, they still have a patent in South Korea for aging skin disorders, kind of a remnant from that time.
Interesting. So what are the key products or services then? INTASYL is the platform, but what makes it special?
The big claim is self-delivering. Many RNAi drugs need, complex delivery systems, like lipid nanoparticles, LNPs.
Right, I've heard of those.
INTASYL compounds are designed differently, modified so they can supposedly get into cells on their own, like having their own key.
Okay.
The company claims this lets them target more cell types, more tissues, especially if delivered locally. They've shown in lab studies rapid uptake into human T cells, which are key immune cells, and it's designed for precise gene silencing.
And they have actual drug candidates based on this, like PH762, that's the lead one.
Yes, PH762. It's an intasulinasrna, small interfering RNA targeting PD-1.
PD-1, that's like a brake on the immune system, right? So silencing it lets the immune cells attack cancer better.
You got it. Takes the foot off the brake. PH762 is given as an injection directly into the tumor.
Intratumoral.
Correct. The goal is localized immune activation right there, which might potentially reduce the side effects you sometimes see with antibody drugs that circulate everywhere.
Makes sense. And it's in trials now.
It is. Phase 1B, dose escalation, for skin cancers, cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma, CSCC, melanoma, Merkel cell carcinoma. They got the FDA IND clearance back in 2023.
And how's that going?
Early days. But the report mentions positive early safety data, and even some early signs of efficacy like complete tumor clearance in a few CSCC patients in the second dose group.
Complete clearance, that sounds significant.
It's definitely encouraging. The trial is now recruiting for the 4th dose level after a positive recommendation for the Safety Monitoring Committee just recently.
Okay, promising start for PH762. What about PH894? That's further behind.
Much further. Still preclinical. It's also an INTASYL compound, but targets something different, BRD4.
BRD4, what's that?
It's an epigenetic regulator. Think of it as controlling gene on-off switches in both immune cells and tumor cells. By silencing BRD4, they hope to boost immune cells, specifically NK cells, natural killer cells.
And how would that be used?
They're looking at using it with adopted cell therapies, ACT. That's where you modify a patient's own immune cells and put them back in. For cancers like melanoma, head and neck, liver cancer, but again, very early stage.
So putting this all together, where does Phio fit in the grand scheme? The big player, small fish.
Definitely a small fish.
Yeah.
A microcap company, market cap around, what, $13 million as of mid-April 2025.
And it's been lower.
$13 million, that's tiny in biotech terms.
Extremely. And
Really?
look at the workforce, maybe 5 to 10 employees.
Seriously, how do they run trials with so few people?
They don't, really. They rely heavily on CROs, contract research organizations for trials, and CMOs, contract manufacturing organizations, to make the drug candidates.
Outsourcing completely. So yes, they're innovating with INTASYL in competitive fields like immuno-oncology and RNAi, but their actual scale, negligible compared to the giants.
So what's their main selling point, their primary value proposition?
It really boils down to novel immuno-oncology treatments using this unique INTASYL self-delivering RNAi. The promise is potentially safer, more effective therapies targeting specific genes. And PH762 offers that potential non-surgical local treatment for skin cancer. That's the hook.
Okay, got a handle on what Phio does. Now let's zoom out. What about the industry landscape? What are the trends?
Well, they're playing in some very dynamic, high-growth areas. First, RNAi therapeutics itself. Projections are big, maybe $4 to $5 billion market by 2033, 2034.
Wow, that's significant growth.
Yeah, annual growth rates estimated around 15% to maybe even 19%, driven by genetics, cancer research, tech improvements, R&D investment. And RNAi, like Phio uses, is the dominant type right now.
And the other field, immuno-oncology, that's been huge.
Absolutely massive. It's transformed cancer care.
Yeah.
That market's also booming. Forecasts vary wildly, but could be anywhere from $34 billion to over $100 billion by the earlier mid-2030s.
Huge range, but definitely growing fast.
Huge range, yeah. Growth rates between, say, 12% and 21% annually. Checkpoint inhibitors, CRT therapies, huge successes driving it. The trend now is combination therapies, biomarkers. And PH762, targeting PD-1, fits right into that core immuno-oncology trend.
And specifically skin cancer, where PH762 is starting, that's growing too.
It is. Projected to hit around $14.5 billion by 2031, growing about 7% a year. Immunotherapies, including PD-1 inhibitors, are already a key part of treating advanced skin cancers. So Phio is definitely in vectors with momentum.
But momentum attracts competition, right? It must be fierce.
You are absolutely right. Fierce is an understatement. On the RNAi delivery side, you've got companies using LNPs. Alnylam is big there. GalNAc conjugates Alnylam again. Arrowhead Arbutus. Polymer conjugates like Arrowhead's tRNA. Other conjugation methods.
So lots of different ways to get RNAi into cells.
Exactly. And then there's self-delivering RNAi, where Phio's INTASYL competes with maybe six-fold bioscience. Plus, totally different approaches like antisense oligonucleotides, ASOs from companies like Ionis. It's crowded.
And in PD-1 inhibition specifically, they're up against giants.
Absolutely. That space is dominated by monoclonal antibodies. Keytruda, Opdivo, massive blockbuster drugs.
So how does PH762 compete?
It has to show advantages. Maybe better efficacy in some patients, better safety profile, easier administration, that local injection versus systemic infusion, lower cost. Its niche might be that local RNAi delivery. That's the differentiator they're banking on.
And PH894 targeting BRD4, competition there too.
Oh, yes. Lots of companies are going after BRD4, mostly with small molecule drugs already in clinical trials, Resverologics, GSK, a whole list. So PH894 needs to prove it's better somehow.
And just generally?
Generally, Phio is competing with hundreds of oncology companies, big and small, for everything. Funding, talent, market share, it's tough out there.
Sounds like navigating the regulators, FDA, and others must be a huge challenge too.
Massive. Clinical trials have multiple phases, strict protocols. Getting IND approval, like PH762 did, is just one step. The rules keep evolving, especially for new tech like RNAi. Manufacturing has to meet really high standards CGMP. It takes deep expertise and, frankly, a lot of money.
So thinking about barriers to entry, it sounds incredibly high.
Extremely high. You need huge R&D investment up front. Strong patents are critical. You need the clinical and regulatory know-how. manufacturing capability. And then you have to fight all that competition we just talked about. It's not easy to just jump in and succeed.
Okay, so growth potential is there, but it's a battlefield. Highly competitive, highly regulated. So what could give Phio an edge? Do they have a competitive advantage? A moat, as they say.
That's always the million-dollar question, isn't it? Especially for early-stage companies. Right now, Phio doesn't have the usual moats. Brand strength, minimal. Cost advantages from scale, none. Network effects, not really applicable.
So it all comes down to their technology.
Pretty much. Their potential moat is almost entirely tied up in that INTASYL platform and what it can do.
Let's revisit INTASYL then. What specifically about it could be a moat?
Again, that self-delivering claim is key. If it really gets into cells efficiently without needing complex carriers like LNPs or conjugates, that could be a real advantage, especially for local delivery, like with PH762.
That lab data showing T-cell uptake supports that a bit.
It offers some support, yes. And they do have patents. The 10K mentions dozens, issued and pending. Protecting that IP is absolutely vital. Plus, the early positive safety and preliminary efficacy signals from TH762's trial. That's the first human evidence, which is a step forward.
But how strong is this potential moat, really?
That's where you have to be critical. Self-delivery might be great locally, but can INTASYL work systemically? For diseases needing treatment throughout the body, that's less clear compared to, say, GalNAc, which is optimized for the liver.
So the edge might be limited.
It might be limited to local or ex vivo uses treating cells outside the body. That could still be valuable, but maybe not as broad. And the patents? Well, the RNAi field is notorious for crowded IP. How strong are Phio's specific claims? Can they defend them? We don't know for sure without a deep dive into the patents themselves.
So INTASYL is the main differentiator, but its strength and durability as a moat are uncertain.
Exactly. Potential, but unproven in the long run.
Right. Makes sense. Let's pivot now to the people running this show. How's the management team look?
Management is crucial, especially in biotech, where execution is everything. The CEO is Robert Bitterman. He's been permanent CEO since February 23, was interim before that, and on the board since 2012.
Okay, long history with the company.
Yes, and over 25 years in pharma biotech exec roles. He actually founded a dermatology company, Catania Life Sciences, led it till it was acquired in 2019.
Dermatology. That seems relevant for PH762 in skin cancer?
It certainly aligns. Apparently, he came out of semi-retirement for Phio, citing the INTASYL potential. He led that strategic shift towards product development we talked about.
Who else is key?
Robert Infernato is the VP and CFO, joined August 2024. Over 20 years in finance, accounting, consulting background, healthcare admin, roles at big pharma like Pfizer, strong finance credentials.
Okay.
Then there's Linda Mahoney as VP of Development, 25-plus years pharma development experience, and Jennifer Phillips, VP Regulatory and Corporate Affairs. PharmD handles regulatory, comms, investor contact.
So a mix of experience, pharma, finance.
This seems like a relevant mix. Bitterman's dermatology background fits the lead program. Mahoney brings development experience. Infernato, the financial side. Their job is tough, though.
Yeah.
Advanced novel tech with very limited resources.
How have they handled challenges? Any major crises?
No single huge crisis reported, but they've navigated the typical micro-cap biotech gauntlet. That strategic pivot, CEO change, cost cuts, headcount, facilities, constant financing challenges with that dilutive equity, and keeping the NASDAQ listing via a reverse split.
So they've shown some resilience.
You could say that. They've kept things going.
Yeah.
But how they'd handle a major clinical setback or, say, a big hit from tariffs, that's untested.
And communication. Are they transparent with investors?
Seems pretty standard for a small public company. Regular press releases for clinical news, financing, appointments, timely SEC filings, basic investor website, some virtual roadshows.
But maybe not super deep disclosure beyond what's required.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Which isn't unusual. They need to conserve resources.
Of any red flags ethically?
Nothing in the report suggests ethical concerns. They operate in a regulated industry. Actually, they proactively warned about recruitment scams using their name, which shows some awareness.
Okay, so summing up the management, experienced, navigated challenges.
But the big caveat for value investors is insider ownership. It's extremely low.
How low?
Like 0.3%. You really want to see management with more skin in the game, right? Aligning their interests with shareholders.
Definitely. Have they been buying stock?
Mostly just stock grants as part of compensation. Very few small open market buys reported, mostly a while back. No recent insider selling reported either. But the lack of significant buying, especially when the price was way down,
Yeah.
that raises questions about alignment.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, let's follow the money. How are they allocating capital? Where is it going?
Well, for a company like Phio, it's mostly R&D, advancing the pipeline. So money goes to the PH-762 trial, the PH-894 preclinical work.
How much are we talking?
In 2024, R&D was about $2.7 million. That was actually down quite a bit from 2023 due to that strategic shift in cost cuts. G&A expenses were around $3.7 million. These are lean numbers, reflecting that microcap reality.
Doesn't sound like they're splashing out on M&A.
No, acquisitions aren't the focus. They did buy Miramune back in 2017, but with current finances. Unlikely they'd buy anything now. More likely they could be acquired if the tech pans out.
Share buybacks,
Yeah.
dividends.
None. Not expected. They're burning cash, need every penny for R&D. Return on invested capital. Meaningless right now. Consistently negative. The value is all future potential.
So how do they fund this R&D? You mentioned equity financing.
Dominated by it.
Oh.
Multiple registered direct offerings, private placements in late 24, early 25. Raised over $11 million gross, often with warrants attached.
Those future stock options again?
Yep. They also raised maybe $3 million or so from people exercising older warrants, sometimes at reduced prices to encourage it. One proposed investment from Triton Funds fell through.
So lots of small funding rounds.
Exactly. It suggests a constant need for cash, maybe difficulty getting larger sums, kind of a hand-to-mouth situation. Creates uncertainty and definitely dilution for existing shareholders. That's a big risk.
So are they allocating capital effectively for shareholders from a value perspective?
It's tough to say yes from a traditional value viewpoint.
Yeah.
They burn cash, lose money, dilute shares. The stock price has likely suffered from the reverse split and constant equity raises.
But in biotech, isn't R&D spending the point?
It is. So you have to ask, is the money advancing the science towards value creation? That early positive PH-762 data suggests maybe the R&D investment is showing some promise.
So the jury's still out?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Success depends entirely on hitting those technical milestones before the cash runs out or dilution becomes excessive. The pattern of frequent, small financings. That points to a tricky funding path and maybe a shorter runway than ideal. Not great for long-term stability.
All right, let's dive into the actual numbers. Financial health check. What do the key metrics tell us?
Okay, let's run through them. Around mid-April 2025, share price, $2.73. Market cap, roughly $13 million. Very volatile. Volume, high average 6.3 million shares a day. That 52-week range again, $0.97 to $9.79. Just huge.
Wild. What about earnings?
Negative. EPS for 2024 was minus $9.80. Revenue, zero. Net loss, $7.15 million for the year.
Ouch, your balance sheet.
Weak main asset is cash, which is $5.4 million at year-end 2024. The good news, no debt. But PE ratio is NA, obviously. Price to book was around 2.7, mostly reflecting that cash.
So unprofitable microcap, volatile, value-based purely on future hopes.
That's the summary. Traditional metrics don't really apply. It's all about the pipeline potential.
Okay. And financial stability. How precarious is it?
It's definitely a major concern. Look at the history consistent net losses. That 2024 loss was smaller, yes, but from cost cuts, not better business fundamentals. No dividends, no debt isn't really a strength here. The issue is cash.
Cash burn and runway. That's the key.
Absolutely. They ended 2024 with $5.4 million, used about $3.1 million cash during the year after raising money. So the gross burn is likely over $7 million a year, matching that net loss.
But they raised more money since then.
Yes, in early 2025. Probably brought cash over $12 million. So based on the 2024 burn rate, maybe enough cash in 2026? Theoretically.
But management qualified that.
They did. Said it's enough for the treatment phase of the current PH-762 trial. That runway is super sensitive. Burn could go up as the trial advances. They almost certainly need more money before any major data readout or next step.
So cost cuts help, but only so much.
Right. They did a balanced savings with R&D progress.
Yeah.
And that reverse split in July 2024 kept them on NASDAQ, but investors often see that as a negative sign. Points to underlying financial pressure.
So precarious is probably the right word. Okay, how's the market digesting all this? What's the sentiment around PHIO?
Overwhelmingly speculative. That's the main takeaway. Price moves seem tied almost entirely to news about the pipeline, especially PH-762.
We saw that rally in early 2025.
Exactly. Positive updates from the Phase 1b trial, Cohort 2 results, Cohort 3 enrollment, that positive safety committee recommendation all drove positive sentiment and a stock rally. Even online chatter turned more positive.
But it's built on shaky ground.
Very shaky. Remember that extreme volatility, the huge 52-week range? High beta too, meaning it moves more dramatically than the market. Sentiment could flip on a dime with the next data point, good or bad.
What about the pros? What are analysts saying?
Coverage is pretty sparse. H.C. Wainwright seems to be the main firm covering them.
And their take?
Generally positive. Consensus seems to be strong buy or buy. H.C. Wainwright has kept a buy rating. One source shows a single analyst with a 100% strong buy. Another cites 85% buy.
Price targets?
Consensus seems to land around $4. That's roughly 46–48% upside from that mid-April price.
Why so optimistic, given the financials?
Likely based on the INTASYL potential, those early encouraging PH762 results, and maybe anticipation of future news trial completion, a licensing deal. One analyst even projected a potential $75 million upfront payment in 2025.
Wow, $75 million. That would be huge for them.
Game-changing. But
Yeah.
you have to be cautious. It's limited coverage, mostly one firm. Potential conflicts of interest can exist between research and investment banking. That $4 target, aspirational, depends entirely on future success.
Makes sense. And recent news impact, we saw clinical news was positive.
Definitely the key driver. Cohort 2 results in Jan 25, Cohort 3 enrollment March 25, safety recommendation April 25, all seem to boost the stock. Conference presentations probably help too.
Financial news, the losses, the finance.
Likely neutral to negative, but just overshadowed by the clinical excitement. The market's hyper-focused on that early data, which again makes it vulnerable if future data disappoints.
What about short sellers? Anyone betting heavily against Phio?
Surprisingly low short interest reported, actually. Around late March, early April 2025, NASDAQ data showed maybe 1.2 days to cover. Other sources around 1.4% to 1.65% of float.
That is surprising, given the risks. Why so low?
Could be the recent positive momentum scared them off. Maybe borrowing shares is expensive, or maybe just reluctance to bet against potentially exciting tech with good early news. Hard to say. But low short interest doesn't mean the fundamentals are solid.
Right. Okay. Sentiment is positive but fragile, driven by hope. Now, who actually owns this stock? What's the ownership structure?
It's quite revealing. Institutional ownership is very low, around 3.2% to 3.4% at the end of 2024.
And who are these institutions?
Top holders listed include Citadel, HRT, Virtue, often market makers, high-frequency traders. Not typically long-term holders. There are tiny positions from index funds, Fidelity, Vanguard, but that's expected.
So no big conviction buys from long-term funds.
Doesn't look like it. Likely due to the microcap status, the risk, no profits, limited analyst coverage. It seems ownership is dominated by retail investors and short-term traders.
And insiders. We touched on this, but remind us.
Extremely low, around 0.3%. Recent transactions were mostly stock grants. CEO Bitterman, CFO Infarinato. Some directors got grants in SIP 2024. Very few small open market purchases earlier on. No recent open market sales reported.
So, again, that lack of significant insider buying, especially at low prices, it's a concern.
It definitely raises that alignment question for external shareholders.
So ownership is dispersed. No big players controlling things.
Appears very dispersed. No dominant institution, minimal insiders. Majority held by the public, retail investors. This likely leaves the board and management with most of the effective control over strategy.
How might that governance structure impact things?
Well, the board has the CEO chairman, Bitterman, several independent directors, including a lead independent director. They added an experienced healthcare investment banker recently, which could be interesting.
Committees. Compensation.
Standard committees likely exist, audit, comp, etc. Comp committee was mentioned. Exec comp is probably the usual mixed salary, bonus, stock incentives like those grants we saw. CEO has an employment agreement with severance.
And the impact on shareholders.
Significant dilution from financing and that reverse split have hurt per share value, though arguably necessary for survival. That low insider ownership creates a potential agency problem-making. Problem management's goals might not perfectly align with maximizing long-term shareholder value. Adding that investment banker to the board maybe signals a focus on strategic deals down the line.
Interesting point. Okay, let's synthesize. Time for a SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Strengths first.
Strengths. That proprietary INTASYL platform is number one. The early positive clinical data for PH762. Experienced leadership, at least on paper, operating in high-growth markets. And their patent portfolio, which is crucial.
Weaknesses. Sounds like a longer list.
It is. Financial vulnerability, low cash, no revenue, high burn rate, reliance on dilutive funding. Very early stage pipeline with high risk. High stock volatility, limited institutional interest. Small size means dependence on partners. And that very low insider ownership.
Opportunities. Where could things go right?
Big opportunity.
Yeah.
Successfully advanced PH-762 through trials to approval. That would validate INTASYL, open doors. Securing partnerships or licensing deals is key, brings in non-dilutive cash and resources, and just generally capitalizing on the growth in RNAi and immuno-oncology if the tech works, addressing unmet needs.
And the threats. What could derail them?
Biggest threat: clinical trial failure. Simple as that. Financing risk running out of money. Intense competition. Regulatory hurdles or IP challenges, manufacturing or supply chain problems, market adoption risk even if approved, and broader economic factors, including those tariffs.
Right, the 2025 U.S. tariffs. Let's specifically talk about their potential impact on Phio.
Yeah, this could hit them in several ways. Increased costs for raw materials, components, APIs, precursors, even equipment, if sourced from affected regions like China or Europe. Even if the final drug is exempt, the starting materials might not be.
And RNAi manufacturing needs specific materials, right?
And it does, so costs could rise. Then there are supply chain disruptions, customs delays, extra paperwork, maybe needing new suppliers, which is costly and takes time. Report mentioned 90% of U.S. biotech relies on imports, could delay trial materials.
What about their partners, the CROs and CMOs?
They face the same issues. If their costs go up, they'll likely pass them on to Phio. Plus, higher costs might force Phio to cut R&D spending, slowing things down.
Yeah.
Even trial supplies. Devices could get more expensive.
And Phio seems particularly vulnerable.
More so than bigger companies, definitely. Limited cash means less ability to absorb costs or shift sourcing quickly. They've already cut costs, so not much fat left to trim. It just adds another layer of operational and financial risk.
Can they do anything to mitigate it?
Options are limited. Work closely with CMOs. Maybe you try to find alternative sources, but that's hard. Factor higher costs into planning. It basically worsens their existing challenges around funding and timelines.
Okay, we've really dissected Phio here. Let's try to wrap this up. Brief conclusion.
Okay, so Phio Pharmaceuticals. Intriguing technology with INTASYL, some encouraging early data for PH-762, but substantial risks. Financial fragility is the big one, pre-revenue, totally dependent on financing. High growth, but super competitive industry. That potential moat. Still speculative. Management's experience, but the low insider ownership is a concern. Fundamentally unprofitable, weak balance sheet. Market sentiment is positive right now, based on hope from early data, but extremely volatile. And they face a minefield of risks, now including tariffs.
So for our listeners looking at this through a value investing lens, what's the bottom line?
The bottom line: this is not a traditional value investment, not even close. Its value hinges entirely on the uncertain future success of a very early stage pipeline. You can't use standard valuation metrics reliably. Any value assessment now is pure speculation on clinical wins, regulatory approvals, partnerships, and finding more funding without completely wiping out shareholders through dilution.
So unsuitable for a classic value investor.
For a strict Buffett-style value investor looking for established, understandable businesses with good economics and aligned management. Absolutely unsuitable. Too many red flags. No profits, weak financials, dilution history, low insider ownership. Investing here requires immense belief in INTASYL, a very high risk tolerance, and faith that management can execute flawlessly despite all the headwinds, including those new tariffs. It's high risk, potentially high reward speculation.
Now, after this deep dive into Phio Pharmaceuticals, we do have one final, maybe slightly surprising thought for you to consider.
Right, think about this. What if Phio's early success, assuming it continues, in treating skin cancer locally? What if that becomes a blueprint? Could they target other localized solid tumors using the same approach, local RNAi delivery of immune checkpoint inhibitors? What other diseases might be uniquely suited for this kind of self-delivering, targeted therapy? Something to ponder.
This has been a deep dive into Phio Pharmaceuticals, based entirely on the sources you provided us.
Hope it was helpful.
If you found this in-depth analysis valuable and you want more deep dives tailored to topics you're curious about, definitely subscribe.
Yes, please subscribe to the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel for more analyses like this one.
And the usual reminders. Please remember, this was a research-based discussion of the information provided. It should absolutely not be considered financial advice.
Definitely not. The biotechnology industry, the stock market, they involve significant risks. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. And this analysis did incorporate AI in processing the source information.
All the sources we use for this deep dive are available for you in the description below.